The next speaker is Rob Griffiths, who's chair of the Lexit campaign and also General Secretary of the Communist Party of Britain.
Thank you very much. Comrades, I'll begin with a confession. I have read every word and every protocol of the two basic treaties of the European Union. I thought it would help me get to sleep at night, but it's had the opposite effect. And what surprises me, amongst other things, is the fact that the motives and the intentions and the priorities of the European Union are set out so clearly in black and white. And because of that, it makes me all the more astonished that so many of our friends and comrades in the Labour movement and on the left are falling for this nonsense that somehow the European Union has something to do with workers' rights and internationalism. Because the treaties set out very clearly just how and why that is not the case. Monetarism is enshrined in the basic treaties of the European Union. The limits on government borrowing and debt for investment in public services and benefits, for example. The role of the European Union Commission and the European Central Bank when it comes to policing and enforcing these monetarist policies that we have seen to such dramatic effect in Greece and Portugal and Ireland and Cyprus. A less known case gives us evidence of how the European Commission enforces these monetarist policies even on regional and devolved governments. In July of last year, the SNP government in Edinburgh was told by the European Commission that it must not raise so much of its finance for its capital investment programme, Scottish Futures, by public borrowing. It must turn to the public sector in order to finance so much of its capital investment programme. And of course, we have seen how these austerity and privatisation policies have been driven by the European Union, often in collaboration, of course, with national ruling classes and their governments, but driven by the European Union across Europe. And then we've had the collective punishment beatings inflicted on workers and peoples by the Troika, the European Central Bank, the European Commission, and the International Monetary Fund. A free market economy is written explicitly into the two fundamental treaties of the European Union. The freedom for big business to move capital, people, commodities around the European Union without let or hindrance in order to maximise profit. How can any socialist support that kind of institution that has those kinds of fundamental treaties? And of course, that capitalist law of the jungle is something that the European Union pursues through the World Trade Organization and through the bilateral trade deals that it forges with other countries and is now secretly negotiating with the United States. The treaties make clear there can be no regulation of trade by member states. There can be no commercial subsidies. In other words, the kind of emergency measures that might be needed to save the steel industry are explicitly outlawed in European Union treaties. And as well, if ever we wanted to use public ownership for wider social or environmental purposes, it's been made very clear by the European Commission that public enterprises must be run on strictly commercial grounds. In other words, strictly capitalist commercial grounds, and wider social and environmental objectives cannot take precedence. Even the kind of policy that John McDonnell is advocating as a cornerstone of his economic strategy for any future Labour government, the idea of people's quantitative easing, that the Bank of England can buy up bonds issued by public sector bodies in order to fund capital investment. Explicit explicitly outlawed by Article 123 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. Now, I know John McDonnell likes a fight, and very often we're fighting on the same side. But why on earth is he now arguing to stay in a setup that explicitly outlaws one of the key policies that he would seek to implement as the Chancellor in a future Labour government? And as for the idea that the European Union can be transformed into some kind of social Europe, well, that's turned into a mirage. It served its purpose. It helped to get the single European market established from 1992. The basic treaties of the European Union, for example, explicitly declare, and this is on our Lexit website, explicitly declare that the European Union will not take any action in order to enforce trade union recognition or collective bargaining rights. It's spelled out in one of the articles of the basic treaties. In the same article, it makes it clear there will be no European Union action to enforce the right to strike. And there will be no European Union policy and action to enforce a minimum wage. And some of the advocates of us remaining in the European Union continue to argue, well, at least it's given us some protection for workers. Well, apart from the fact that would appear to be a very strange assertion to many workers today in Greece and Portugal and Ireland and elsewhere, we have had at least 12 major anti-trade union pieces of legislation in Britain since 1980. The European Union has not inhibited or blocked a single one of them. It's provided no protection whatsoever against the anti-trade union laws. It provided no protection to the workers at GCHQ when their unions were banned. It's provided no protection to workers who were blacklisted. It provided no protection to workers at Orgreave under that enormous attack by the militarised police. We're told, nevertheless, we've made some gains as a result of being in the European Union. The Posted Workers Directive provides at least some rights for imported workers. Well, that might have been somewhere to be found in the original directive, but we have had 4 judgments from the European Court of Justice since then, the EU court. We have had 4 judgments explicitly banning trade union action or regional or national government legislation that seeks to impose equal terms and conditions and treatment for imported, or in the EU jargon, posted workers. Now, at one time, the TUC in Britain and the European TUC used to campaign against those judgments of the European Court of Justice. Now, silence. Nothing. Absolutely nothing, as if they haven't happened. I was told, what about the Working Time Directive? Well, for a start, the Working Time Directive was never imposed on Britain, and when a Labour government decided to implement a directive limiting working hours, it allowed workers to be pressured into opting out of the 48-hour week. Again, no protection from the EU. In fact, that opt-out is available to every worker in every member state if their employers can succeed in bullying them into it. So, comrades and friends, we're campaigning against this big business, anti-democratic European Union. And let's not just leave it there. We're not just campaigning against the European Union from a left and Labour movement and anti-imperialist perspective. We're campaigning against the EU-IMF NATO axis, because that's what we're facing on June the 23rd. Alignment with NATO is now explicitly written into the fundamental treaties of the European Union and 2 of the protocols. How can any peace campaigner, how can any opponent of nuclear weapons now support remaining in a European Union that has an unamendable basic law aligning itself with NATO and rearmament and the construction of a military-industrial complex? So, comrades, we have to go forward and we have to make it clear we've never had anything from the European Union that we haven't had to fight for ourselves and hold ourselves. All the gains we've made in the past have come as the result of struggle and if we're not prepared to fight to retain them, the European Union will help to erode them. That's why we have to try and win this vote on June the 23rd. And one final word. There are those who say, well, if Cameron and Osborne are defeated, we might have a government led by Michael Gove or Boris Johnson and so on. Boris Johnson, at the head of a Tory party that is tearing itself apart with a majority of 18, who could imagine that that's going to last very long? Boris Johnson wouldn't be able to lead a stable Tory government with a majority of 218, never mind just 18. So let's have confidence. Let's go out and seek to instill that confidence into working people and their families. We only gain what we are prepared to fight for. And we have to be very clear, the main enemy is not the Farages and the Goves or the Boris Johnsons, although they're certainly on the other side. It's the European Union, the IMF and NATO axis that we've got to be voting against on June the 23rd.